Do you enjoy the harvest of Missouri through food, fuel, or fiber? Interested in strengthening your community or making a difference in the lives of others? You're in the right place. This is Stand for Ag with Missouri Farmers Care. Join us for thoughtful conversations around the intersections of farmer, rancher, and consumer interests. Grab a seat, press play, and join the conversation.
Welcome back to Stand for Ag with Missouri Farmers Care. We have a great conversation on tap today, and a timely topic, certainly one that we often wrestle with across agriculture, consumers, really every aspect of life. I think if the last couple of years have given us opportunities for anything, it's the opportunity to have hard conversations with people who may be on a different point of a spectrum on their perspectives. And so today we're going to delve in and talk about having hard conversations in agriculture. My guest is Eric Bohl. He's the Director of Public Affairs and Advocacy with Missouri Farm Bureau. Welcome, Eric.
Thanks for having me, Ashley. I appreciate it.
It's great to have you. So Eric and I have started this conversation already. We were invited along with Kalina Bruce, a Farm Bureau leader, to have an opportunity to delve into this topic with Missouri young farmers and ranchers at their state conference down at Margaritaville a month or so ago. It was a good conversation. It was one in which I think we all got to reflect on the ways that we have hard conversations and got to engage those attendees down there that are emerging leaders in their own right across agriculture. So I know I enjoyed it, Eric, and I was looking for the opportunity to share what we had thought about and talked about just on a broader perspective.
Yeah, it really was a lot of fun. I'm glad they thought to ask us to do it. It wasn't even necessarily our idea. They came to us and said, hey, this is something a lot of people struggle with. And like you said, it's been maybe even more common the past couple of years as people have been dealing with the struggles of the pandemic and food shortages at the grocery store where they couldn't find what they wanted or things like that. There have been a lot more opportunities for conversation. So it was good that they reached out to us and made us think about how should we approach these types of conversations as well.
Exactly. That they did a great job thinking through that program. That whole event was a rousing success in my mind. But as we started thinking, Eric was talking about the echo chambers that we live in. And as we've said, as entire life has become polarized the last couple of years. It's not just politics that are polarized anymore, even in our rural communities, right? Everything is a bit polarizing. And so talk us through what you were thinking as you're reflecting on our echo chambers, and those we often surround ourselves with often reflect back our own personal views, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really when you think about where you come from and the world that you live in, people always use that metaphor about fish swimming in water not knowing that they're wet because it's just such a natural part of what you're around. You think that's just normal. And I think that's what the concept of the echo chamber really is. It's not something that crazy people are in. It's something that everybody's in. We all have just the world that we surround ourselves with is typically very similar to our own views, our own lifestyles, and the people who are friends with us that we hang out with or that are family members. More often than not, if you thought of your, say, 5 closest friends or your 5 closest family members, put those 10 people together, how many of those would you guess probably voted for the same person for president as you did the last time that opportunity arose? How many of those people watch the same TV shows as you do? How many watch the same general types of movies as you do? How many live on a farm or in a rural area? Or if you live in a city, how many live in the city? Usually, I'd say it's probably 8 out of 10. You could probably say more or less come from the same type of general background as you. And that means that the conversations you have usually come from that angle. My brother-in-law lives in Brooklyn, New York. He grew up in Sykeston on the farm, but he has lived in Brooklyn for almost 10 years now. I can tell you the people he's around there have a very different point of view from the people I'm around living in mid-Missouri. And that doesn't make him right or wrong. It doesn't make me right or wrong. It's just the kind of the atmosphere that you exist in is the way that I think about an echo chamber, not something that's special to crazy people, but just the place where everyone lives.
Absolutely. I think Eric and I are both parents of young but growing children. And so I think of friends that we make are made for us in the rodeo arena or on the soccer field or in the basketball court. It's the people that are already naturally sharing interests, let alone those we go to church with or have other extracurricular activities with. There's a lot of similarities there. In agriculture, I don't know, I'm very, very deeply embedded in agriculture, but in agriculture, I think we probably live such a life where our profession and our personal identities are very similar in that we may even exacerbate this a little bit, right? We don't have the same sort of vacations and time off and the ability to commit to social activities because it depends on the weather, the rain, the planting season. And so I know often when we're finally done with work, we want to sit down and talk about the same things we worked on all day. There's a plethora of internet memes that say, I want to talk about cows, and then I want to talk about cows some more and cows some more. And so
Right.
we certainly want to share. It's such a passion. It's such a lifestyle, a passion, and a business, all interwoven.
And that's how often do you hear people in agriculture say things like, agriculture is not just a business, it's a way of life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true. But like you say, that really also bleeds over into this issue that can sometimes become a problem,
Mm-hmm.
which is if you're so deeply invested in the echo chamber that you've created for yourself because of how much that becomes a part of your identity, then sometimes it can be hard to talk to people who aren't already in that same type of place and coming from that same place. So the problem that the reason this is even an issue, there's nothing right or wrong about it,
Mm-hmm.
but where it can become a problem is if we're trying to speak so that people who are not already part of that same point of view will actually listen to us.
Yep.
We have to be able to relate to them in a way that they can open their ears and hear us.
Yep.
And if the only people you talk to are people exactly or very similar to you, it might be hard to have those conversations in ways that allow people to listen to us.
Yeah. Even though many of us, that's our goal, right? We're frustrated when agriculture is misportrayed in the media, in a variety of ways, when consumers have fundamental misunderstandings about what we do and why we do it and our true values and motivations. Our goal is we would just like to take consumers and talk to them and open their eyes, which is why organizations like yours and mine exist in part, right? To help tell that story. But on an interpersonal level, we often want to say, your meat is healthy. We are caring for the environment. Whatever has been the most recent attack on agriculture or misunderstanding of agriculture, I think many of us share that goal that we would just like to set the record straight. And
Right.
so, I recently, as we shift to some things to think about as we're doing that, talking to someone outside of our echo chamber, I recently had the opportunity to do so. So, of course, I, like most parents, think my children are adorable and do adorable things. And so I've
met them.
Thank you. Thanks. Yours are as well. So I have started making reels on Facebook, Instagram, because we live a very ranchy life up here. It's something that not a lot of people do. And so just wanting to share that story a little bit and share a little bit of hope that there's a whole generation of hardworking kids out here that are going to be just fine, right? And so we're sharing work on the ranch, riding horses, roping and doctoring cattle that are ill. And they've started, a couple of them became viral. So broader audience than just rural Missouri, international audience. And I had some people say, oh, that poor calf did not deserve that. And so the calf was roped and drug over to be vaccinated and herd health taken care of. And at first, Eric, my first thought was, I don't have time. I'm busy. This is probably someone diametrically opposed to my worldview. Am I going to get anywhere with this conversation? I actually muted the comment. And then my conscience kicked in and I said, this is an opportunity. And through that opportunity, I did a pretty straightforward response that we can talk through some points on and explained why that wasn't my pet, but I respected that animal and its health was of my utmost priority. And that woman has become an avid follower of mine through one conversation, right? We've met so many that are so entrenched that we're like, well, there's just differences of opinion and we're never going to agree. This is a vegan who has never been around animals besides pets. And I now have the continuing opportunity, everything I share, she's like, that's just amazing. I've just never gotten to be on the ranch. So let's talk through when we're presented that opportunity that is outside of our comfort zone and takes a little time, but can be so worth the investment. You know, when you're starting to frame up a message, which is, you're a professional at framing up messages. Tell us what you're thinking through and looking for to relate to the audience.
Sure. I think the most important thing, the place that I always try to start, anytime we're trying to create a message to reach an audience, and an audience can be one person or it can be a million people. So don't take audience to mean just like, you know, standing at a concert and looking at the crowd. It could just be one person. But when you're trying to think through how your message needs to be crafted and framed, you have to stand in the shoes of those people that you're trying to talk to, not you as the person who wants to say something. It's important to try to have that empathy to say, if I didn't know anything about this stuff and I was standing on the other side of the conversation, what would make me open my ears and listen? What would make me consider it? So that's how we want to start, is by trying to put yourself in their shoes and understand where they're coming from, number one, and what type of life they lead, what type of personality they have. And therefore, that'll give you some ideas as to what conversations they may be open to, I think. One thing you mentioned, well, we talk all the time about, you know, how many people would you hope that you'd be able to reach? You know, you're not going to be able to reach everybody. Some people are just never going to listen to you. And I think that's okay. You just need to realize and accept that you're not going to change every mind, and that shouldn't be the goal. But if you think, you know, I should be able to at least have a conversation with, say, 60% of people. That seems rational or reasonable, right? Well, what percentage of people live on a farm and work on a farm? 2%?
Under 2?
Yeah. So that means you've got, say, 58% more that you need to be able to talk to who don't live on a farm. So you need to be able to understand where they're coming from. And that's, you know, when you think about it in those terms, I think it starts to become more obvious, like, oh yeah, well, there's a huge group of people who don't really do this for a living, and that's okay. It doesn't mean they're dumb. It just means they don't do that. It's I always use an example too of, like, if you started talking about technical banking terms, well, I'm sure less than 2% of Americans are bankers. That doesn't mean that everyone who isn't a banker is stupid. It just means that's not what they do anymore. So maybe it's helpful to have that humility and step back and not treat them like they're dumb, because that doesn't tend to make people want to listen to you.
Exactly. So it's tax time. And this is one of the examples we use in our conversation at Young Farmers and Ranchers. I just had the conversation yesterday, Eric, that I had 4 scenarios my tax professional laid out in front of me, and it quickly went over my head because I don't care to understand the industry, right? I really trust my tax professional. There's a reason I hire professionals for things like accounting and medical treatment and farrier services and others. And so I very quickly thought, she did a great job explaining it, but I was thinking, I'm going to rely on her expertise and judgment, and that's some of the credibility that we earn as well when we approach a conversation without being overly technical, without delving into jargon, but becoming relatable. You know, I often tell myself, 1, the best conversation starter in that situation can be a question, that to understand where your audience is coming from. And 2, I often remind myself, if it's in front of multiple people, there's a reason that it is the vocal minority and the silent majority, right? That majority in the room might be 95%. You really might have 93% of an audience that may have questions, may be uninformed, may not be relatable at first, but really just doesn't have enough information to begin forming an opinion. or a perspective. And so I try to remind myself regularly that those that have intellectual curiosity are the best people to connect with. If they're there questioning, they want to know more. And it's our job to really feed that intellectual curiosity to be able to build those bridges of, shared values and understanding.
Yeah. And so with that first thing, I try to think of this as putting it into buckets, talking about the audience, thinking about the audience that you're going to be speaking to. I do try to keep it, and we did this with physical buckets when we did our presentation, but we had a green bucket and a red bucket. And the green bucket was trying to use simple terminology. And when you're thinking about an audience that doesn't come from a ag or farming background. Again, like you say, if it was a CPA talking about taxes and 98% of the people that they're going to talk to don't have a tax background, then they're going to want to use terminology that makes sense to those people that haven't gone through CPA, training. Same thing with agriculture. If you're very deep into livestock, which you have much more of a background than I do on that. I don't understand those terms. Like people start talking about backgrounding and replacement this and all the different terms for types of heifers and bulls and steers. And like, I guess I probably know what most of those terms mean if I really stop and think about it, but most people don't know what any of that stuff means. So avoiding the jargon, which would be kind of the red bucket, the overly technical terminology for your audience and the jargon from your industry, and just speaking about in simple common terms, like rather than sows, you talk about pigs or mother pigs, or baby pigs, rather than using the technical terminology. Things like that can really be helpful and just opening up your audience to even hearing what you're going to say.
Absolutely. I agree completely. I had a great conversation once in which I was talking about heifer bulls, and the guy's like, whoa, he was a cattleman, but a beginning cattleman. He's like, hang on.
Yeah.
I think I'm really confused. And so I often think in ag about what I call just the alphabet soup, where, not only do we have a lot of technical terms, we have a lot of abbreviations. We have FFSA and USDA and NRCS and soil and water, and let alone GMOs and artificial insemination, AI, and many of those things can be, and really only GMOs have a broad base of recognition among consumers, not even understanding, and it's mostly a negative connotation, right? So working really hard to think through how we're explaining takes some work. Like in the midst of a conversation that we use so much shorthand and so many technical terms, it's really a conscious decision.
Yeah. And it really does take the effort to back out and realize, so which of these terms would I have not had a clue about 30 years ago or 10 years ago, however old you are. And if it's a term that wouldn't have made sense to you without someone in the industry explaining it to you when you were getting started, then it's probably one you should try to back out of using in conversations like this. So just try to avoid that overly technical jargon and keep it in the green bucket of using simple language. And like you say, it does take some practice and really thinking it through, but it is very, very helpful when you're trying to think about your audience.
And some of us who were born and raised in agriculture, you can't even think back to 30 years ago. You can, my kids understand. So I try to think of when I have the opportunity to go speak to a third grade classroom of just community members, just what those kids would understand. They're bright, they're sharp, they're ready to learn. Just what they can grasp is often what we're looking for. So I think because we've talked about how personal agriculture is to so many farm families, right? It's our identity. And so often when we get a question that may be an uninformed question, but maybe not intended to be assertive, it feels like we've been attacked, right? It feels like, and we often are. I give a nod to, there was just a huge documentary that actually was an attack on agriculture. And so they do happen. It was a well-coordinated 13-minute video that was attacking agriculture, but that's not necessarily the motivation of most people that we have the opportunity to connect with and speak with. And so let's just talk a little bit about tone and how to be very intentional with our tone and assume the best.
Yeah, and this can be one of the hardest parts of this
Yes.
for almost anyone in agriculture, because like you say, when you feel attacked, you want to immediately defend yourself and you want to counterpunch. And that is really a hard instinct to overcome, to suppress the instinct to punch right back. But again, if we're talking about trying to engage with people so that they'll be open to what we're saying, there's nothing more important than this. I think that it's pretty obvious to most people that if you go on the attack and punch back, or you are condescending towards the other person, that just shuts them off. You know, if Will Smith had a great point to counter what Chris Rock had said the other day, punching him in the face, slapping him in the face really was not the way to make Chris Rock open to Will Smith's point of view. You know, that pretty well shuts you down and say, yeah, well, I don't care what you thought, now you're a jerk. So that's the number one reason to avoid that, of course. But being defensive is also, you know, rather than just being on the counterattack, even having that defensive posture can make it hard for people to listen to you, because when you have a defensive tone of, well, that's not what I'm saying. Well, that's, well, I didn't do that. It immediately makes it a more of a debate, a confrontation between the two sides. Now you're trying to debate who was right and who was wrong, rather than actually listening to each other's points of view and trying to reach that, you know, common understanding. So rather than responding with defensiveness or counterattacking, try to have some grace. Again, we're assuming that they probably don't know a lot about this topic, because the people we're talking to typically don't live on a farm, don't work on a farm, don't come from a farm. So just accept that maybe they don't know what the details truly are and what the right answer really is. So have some grace and accept the fact that they're not trying to be mean, they just don't know. And that's okay. We're here to have a conversation. So be graceful. You know, the things that you can do are just take the punch, absorb it, and then try to come back in response in a calm, respectful way, and see where that takes the conversation. Sometimes it'll be good. If they keep on punching and keep on punching and keep on punching, might be a person that you need to move on and realize this isn't the person who I'm going to end up having a great conversation with. But I think 9 times out of 10, people are willing to have a conversation as long as you don't attack them back after their initial statement.
Yeah, I really try to remind myself over and over and over again. I appreciate people who are passionate and engaged, whatever side of the perspective they're on. We probably are driven by fairly mutual values. We just have a different understanding of those perspectives, right? So when I have the opportunity to talk to people who are very concerned environmentalists, let's say, so are we in agriculture. We are actually the stewards of the land, the air, the water, the wildlife. 95% of that is in our hands in Missouri agriculture. And so when I'm coming from someone who may be really standing in a position of opposition to agriculture, I try to remind myself they're being driven by shared values that we're just interpreting differently in our lives, and that we probably have far more in common, that we can find that place of grace for each other than we are coming at this from, you know, different perspectives, different positions, but probably over a shared value. So when I'm reminding myself, be graceful, take this, I just try to continue to say, you know, we actually share the value of concern for the land, maybe, or concern for animals, or concern for health of ourselves and the environment and the people that we are creating food, feed, fuel, fiber, forest products, and everything else for, concerned for our economy across the board. Generally, we have a lot in common with all of those people who are very motivated. So I just kind of repeat that mantra to myself over and over again as we're having those conversations, until the point that we reach a mutual understanding, or it's time to walk away from a conversation, an engagement, an interaction online, whatever it may be.
Yeah, and so the green bucket on this one obviously is using grace, being graceful in response to what people say to you. And then the red bucket is being defensive or lashing out. in response. And yeah, like you say, the person on the other side oftentimes is not meaning to offend you. They're not coming at it trying to be mean to you. Let's say if they make an accusation, for instance, like, oh, I think that farmers are hurting their animals or abusing their animals or something. I think it's abuse for them to be in in confinement in a barn. Rather than saying, well, I'm not hurting them. That's not what I'm doing. Taking it, not to rebut the specific argument that they're making, but the gracefulness, I think you can take what they said and try to respond to the broader emotion that they were trying to convey. Like you were saying, that it's about, do you care for your animals? That's really the question they're asking. They're not really asking if the specific practice that they talked about is good or bad, or is helpful or harmful. That was not really the point. The point was they care about animals and they want them to be treated well. And so your counterpoint then, using the graceful response, is, well, I do too. Yes, I do care about animals as well. Now let's talk about what specifically you brought up. But if you don't lead with that shared value, then it shuts off the conversation entirely and takes you down the wrong road.
Exactly. And that rolls right into, I think, our last main point. The last two buckets that we used is about being not only relatable, or not only graceful, but also relatable, and how we just need to be thoughtful in the way that we approach topics as well. I've gotten to do this a lot recently, Eric, in that there was a huge, I think this is driven by, there was a huge explosion in pet ownership in COVID. Right. Everybody went and bought a dog, right? And we love our dog. It actually is an animal that lives in our house. We snuggle with it. We give it baths, which is all wonderful. Love the pet industry. However, those aren't my cattle, nor my horses, nor sheep, nor working dogs, nor hogs, nor anything else. There is a different barometer of safety. There's a different level of care. They are not the same animals. But I've seen a lot of people recently, saying, oh my gosh, I would never do that to my furry baby, and it's simply not the same. And so I think explaining well in a relatable way, I care for my animals the same, but they take a different level of care. Or this is why I can't just walk up to that calf. This was the suggestion. She said, why can't you just walk up to that calf to give it its shots? And I said, well, here's a farm family. We're using our children as our helpers. We would be kicked, we would be run over, the calf would be more stressed, we would all be worse off at the end of the day, where I try to walk up to a 300-pound calf and have a conversation like I would with my dog, that, so I see this playing out that way and many other ways. But let's talk a little bit about, the last set of buckets that we used as an example.
Yeah. We said that it's really important to think about the terms that you're using, the connotations that they can have. And your red bucket would be avoiding the terms with bad connotations, and the green bucket, the better one that you're striving for, are using relatable terms and things that are more common for the people that you're talking to. So example of this might be and this kind of goes to something you mentioned earlier, that we use jargony terms a lot of times, and so it is kind of related to that point as well. But people talk about spraying chemicals on our farm. Well, yeah, I mean, it is a chemical, and yes, you are spraying it. But if it's not somebody who comes from a farm background, that can sound pretty awful. Like, I don't want you spraying chemicals all over my food. I mean, who wants food that's had chemicals sprayed all over it?
Nobody.
But that's not really that's a term that can leave the wrong impression in someone's mind, I guess is the point. It's really not true. The image that it creates in their mind is not really the image of reality. And so using a more relatable term that's still true and honest is really the right path here. So, you might talk about the products we use to protect our crops, or the ways that we treat our animals to keep them healthy. It's not misleading, it's not dishonest to say things in a different way that won't leave a connotation that has an image in their mind that really isn't true. That they're loaded up with chemicals or pesticides, or loaded up with antibiotics that are going to make poison my children. Not at all what we're talking about. But if you use the wrong terminology, it can sound really bad and leave an image in someone's mind that just isn't accurate.
Absolutely. And there's a lot, you're exactly right. There's a lot of ways, again, that we have to kind of step out of our own shoes into somebody else's shoes to say, how does that sound? There's a lot of opportunities there, and the issues abound, right? From, I often get into conversations about clean water and CAFOs and feeding animals, animal welfare. I mean, we also talked through at our session, climate change, waters the United States, Endangered Species Acts and the environment, what conservation looks like, and that it doesn't just look like setting land aside, but it can look like production agriculture. And so the Farm Bill, the issues abound, right? And we all get presented with new issues and different issues. And whether on an organizational or a personal level, we all have the opportunity to engage in these, I think, consumer intersecting concepts that happen and opportunities that happen in agriculture. I think that's why those are some hot topics that we often get to talk about, because consumers care. They care about where their meat's coming from, how their animals are treated, how their food is raised. And those are all good things, because we have the right story to tell, and we have a good story to tell, and we're doing it right and doing it better all the time. It's just equipping us all to tell that story is, kind of why we all sit in these seats, is to do a good job. Right. As good a job telling our story as we do on the farm, we will be a success. Like, I truly believe we're out here working hard as a collective every day. And if we can attend with as much detail and care, concern, and such a long-term vision with telling that story as we do in our production practices and the value that we bring to our communities, we have the United States and the population of the world standing squarely behind us, because we're doing the right thing for the right reason.
Yeah, and I always think that if we really believe that, if we buy what we're selling, if we really believe that we're doing it right, and we're treating animals with respect and raising them the way that they ought to be raised, and treating our land the way it ought to be treated, then we shouldn't be afraid of having conversations, because we should believe that if the truth comes out and we tell the story in an appropriate way, we're going to come out and the truth will prevail, and absolutely, we will prove that we are doing things the way that they ought to be done, or that we're moving towards always being better and always improving the way that we are doing things. There's nothing to be afraid of and hide if we really believe what we're selling. And I do believe it. When we say these things that we are the best stewards for the environment, it's not a talking point to me. That's actually like honest. I really do believe that inherently. And if that's the case, if you really do believe those things, you shouldn't be afraid of talking about it, because you have the right story. You have the best story to tell. But it's a matter of finding the ways to tell it that actually connect with the audience. Yep. That's really the hardest part, and what's really valuable about having conversations like this one today.
Yeah, I agree. And I often think literally or figuratively opening the barn door to the farm or the farm gate or whatever it is a win for agriculture, that when we're doing that well, that's a success. Well, this has been a great conversation. I've appreciated your time. By the way, we didn't really even get into Eric's qualifications and background. He's an eminently qualified individual with a diverse background that actually kind of speaks to why you've had to think through having hard conversations, Eric, and how to tackle thorny conversations with grace.
Oh, that's been my life. Yes, I've been an attorney. I've worked in Congress. I was legislative director and chief of staff for Congresswoman Vicky Hartzler, and then chief of staff for Congressman Jason Smith, and now working in Missouri Farm Bureau, and essentially as our director of communications. That's what I've done all along throughout my career, is find ways to have those conversations where you can connect with people who don't already agree with you. And I do come at this from a different angle than a lot of people in agriculture do, because I didn't grow up on a farm. I grew up what I would call farm adjacent. My whole family farms and has farms, but I didn't personally grow up on the farm. So I was familiar with it, but I've had to learn the details and understand why people do things the way they do from an outsider's perspective. And I think that sometimes that can be helpful to seeing a different way to tell the same story.
We certainly appreciate having you on the Missouri agriculture team, because you do bring that unique perspective that we all do, but we really appreciate it. So everybody should also think about tuning in. Missouri Farm Bureau has a great podcast. It's called Digging In with Missouri Farm Bureau. They tackle tough issues and emerging issues. What's going on in agriculture? What's going on in Missouri Farm Bureau? And it's a great podcast and one well worth a listen to equip yourself on, kind of the hot topics, what's going on in the Capitol, many other things. It's a bevy of issues that you guys dig into as well.
Yeah, and you can find that at mofb.org/podcast if you're interested in checking out Digging In with Missouri Farm Bureau, or just search for it on any podcast app. But mofb.org/podcast is probably the easiest way to find it. And yeah, we've been having a lot of interesting conversations with some national thought leaders on agriculture topics, as well as diving deep into what's happening in the legislature. What little is happening in the legislature right now. We've been trying to analyze it and hopefully see where some progress could be made. So we're having a lot of good conversations over there, and would love to have more people over there listening to us.
Absolutely. Let's each drop a go-to resource, by the way. So we've hit on how to have a conversation. Let's just briefly drop a couple of resources that we utilize on specifics, where to go to find resources. So one that I utilize is Common Ground. It is a coalition of agriculture groups that have come together to talk about, in a very consumer-friendly, consumer-facing way, the issues that are on consumers' minds. And so you can find them at findourcommonground.com. There is literally tabs where you can pull up antibiotic use or environmental impact, things like that I find very useful. What are some of your go-tos, Eric?
Yeah, Common Ground does some great work. I definitely recommend them as well. And we partner with them on a lot of things. We've also done some work with the Center for Food Integrity, CFI, and they are actually based in Kansas City, but a national organization that does some empirical research and outside work, outside of agriculture, to talk about the food system and relate to consumers. And their website has some great resources. I definitely recommend going there to see what they've come up with, because they do panels of consumers where they just talk to them about topics. It's like a focus group, and ask them questions about GMOs or about the different methods that food is raised. And then you can watch those panels. Sometimes on their website they'll have recordings of those, and you can really open your eyes as to how the other half sees things, or how the other 98% sees things.
Exactly. And it is not only eye-opening, it's mind-blowing.
Oh yeah.
If you have the opportunity to go find it, your jaw will drop. And it is so good for us to hear just what the man off the street thought perspective on what we're doing and food and how they make their food decisions and what motivates them. I highly recommend them as well.
I actually was fortunate enough. The Missouri Soybean Association sponsored me to go to one of their conventions, the CFI conference, a couple of years ago. And they did one of these panels in person at that conference. And there were about 40 or 50 of us sitting in the room, our mouths hanging on the table as we listened to these people. And they were just normal people off the street, not, activists or anything. They were just totally normal shoppers. And they would ask them these questions. And it was unbelievable. And it really did make you think a lot differently about how to approach these topics. So a lot of good information there. I highly recommend going there if you have questions about things.
Absolutely. Always for those that may be listening but don't follow Farm Bureau or Missouri Farmers Care on socials, there's always opportunities there as well. So, thank you, Eric. It's been a great conversation. We appreciate the time. And listeners, thank you for tuning into this episode of Stand for Ag with Missouri Farmers Care. We appreciate your time and hope that you've benefited from this conversation as we all work to share the good story of Missouri agriculture.
Thank you for joining the Stand for Ag podcast with Missouri Farmers Care. We're excited to bring you new stories each week. We as agriculturalists have a lot of stories to tell. Stories of resilience, grit, and stories of families that are united by their passion for agriculture. Each week, tune in for a new episode and join the conversation.